No birds. That was the first thing I noticed, not because I was looking for them, but because there weren't any. The trees stretched around Blackwater Lake for miles, tall pines, thick undergrowth, perfect wilderness, yet not a single bird crossed the sky. No insects buzzed around the porch light, no frogs called from the shoreline. Even the water looked wrong, perfectly still, as if the entire lake had stopped breathing. I remember turning to Ryan and saying, "This place is too quiet." He laughed. "You've lived in the city too long." I wanted to believe him. Now, I wish I had left right then. This is Tales of the Dark. A subscriber recently shared this experience after a weekend trip to a remote mountain lake. The names and location have been changed for privacy, but every detail has been told exactly as it was remembered. It was supposed to be our last trip together before everyone got too busy with work. There were 5 of us: me, Ryan, Chris, Noah, and Tyler. Ryan had rented a cabin beside Blackwater Lake. It looked incredible in the listing. Private dock, small beach, surrounded by forest, no nearby neighbors, no phone reception, exactly what we wanted. The owner met us at the entrance road. He was an older man, probably in his 70s, quiet. Didn't smile much. He handed Ryan the keys and pointed toward the lake. "Beautiful place." Ryan nodded. "It really is." The old man hesitated, then added, "If the woods go quiet, go inside." Ryan laughed. "What do you mean?" The old man looked toward the trees. "You'll understand." That was all he said. He climbed back into his truck and drove away. Chris watched him disappear down the dirt road. Every cabin owner has to say something creepy. We all laughed at the time. It felt like harmless local folklore. The cabin sat on a small hill overlooking the lake. It was older than the pictures suggested. Weathered wood, stone chimney, large wraparound porch. Everything beyond the dock disappeared into endless pine forest. No houses, no roads, nothing, just mountains. The first afternoon was perfect. We unpacked, started a fire, cooked steaks outside, played cards, told stories from college. Everything felt normal except the silence. At first we thought it was peaceful, no traffic, no airplanes, no people, but after an hour, it became impossible to ignore. There weren't any birds, not one. No squirrels climbed the trees, no insects landed on the food, even the flies stayed away. Tyler looked around. "Has anyone heard anything?" We stopped talking, listened, nothing, not complete silence, just enough to feel wrong. The lake barely touched the shore, the trees never moved. It was like standing inside a photograph. Ryan shrugged. "Maybe it's because we're higher in the mountains." Nobody questioned it until sunset. Chris skipped a flat stone across the lake. Usually you'd hear splash after splash. Instead, the sound echoed much farther than it should have. It bounced across the valley, again, long after the stone had disappeared. Tyler frowned. "Did anyone else hear that?" I nodded. "It echoed too long." Ryan clapped his hands once. The clap rolled across the lake. It kept going, almost 10 seconds. Nobody spoke after that. That night we built another fire. The flames cracked softly. Every tiny sound seemed unnaturally loud. Someone opening a soda can sounded like a gunshot. A chair scraping across the deck echoed into the forest. Chris laughed nervously. "I feel like something's listening." Nobody laughed with him. Around midnight, we finally went inside. I woke sometime later needing water. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. The cabin was completely dark. I walked quietly into the kitchen, then stopped. The silence had become absolute. Not even the refrigerator hummed. No wind, no water, nothing. It was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. I stood perfectly still, waiting, hoping to hear something, anything. Then, a single cricket chirped, somewhere outside, just once. Another answered, farther away, within seconds. Dozens joined in, hundreds. The entire forest exploded with sound. Birds, frogs, insects, leaves moving, branches snapping, the lake splashing. It was deafening. I almost covered my ears. Then, everything stopped, at exactly the same moment, like someone had pressed a switch. Silence. Again, then. Footsteps, crunch, crunch, crunch. Someone was walking around the cabin, slowly. They weren't running, they weren't hiding, just walking, one complete circle. I rushed to the bedroom. Ryan, he woke immediately. "What? Someone's outside." Within seconds, everyone was awake. Ryan grabbed a flashlight. Chris picked up the bear spray we'd brought for hiking. The footsteps continued, around the back of the cabin, past the kitchen window, across the porch. Then they stopped. Directly beneath my bedroom window, nobody moved. The flashlight shook slightly in Ryan's hand. We waited. 1 minute, 2, 3, nothing. Finally, Ryan pulled back the curtain. Nobody. The porch was empty. The dirt beneath the window was untouched. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. Tyler whispered. We all heard it. Nobody answered because we had, every one of us. The next morning, we searched around the cabin. No tracks, no signs of animals, no evidence that anything had been there. Chris tried explaining it. Maybe deer. Ryan shook his head. Deer don't walk circles around houses. Noah wandered toward the dock. A few seconds later, he called us over. The water beside the dock was crystal clear. We could see almost to the bottom. Fish should have been everywhere. Instead, there was nothing, not one. No weeds moving, no turtles, no insects floating on the surface, just empty water. Then Tyler noticed something hanging from a tree, a bird's nest, perfectly intact. Empty. Another, also empty. We searched the shoreline. Every nest we found was abandoned. No feathers, no eggs, nothing. Chris looked toward the forest. This doesn't make any sense. Ryan tried calling the cabin owner. No signal. The landline inside the cabin produced only static. Around sunset, the silence returned, not gradually, instantly. One moment the wind rustled the trees, the next, everything stopped, every sound, every living thing. Noah slowly looked toward the forest. Guys, his voice barely rose above a whisper. I think, it's getting closer. We followed his gaze. The tree line stood less than 50 yards away, dark, motionless. Then, deep inside the woods, something heavy took one slow step. The entire forest remained silent, as if every living creature already knew what was coming. Nobody spoke. The 5 of us stood frozen on the porch, staring into the trees. The forest was only 50 yards away. Normally, it should have been alive. Branches moving, birds flying, leaves rustling. Instead, it looked like a photograph, completely still. Then, another step, heavy, slow, somewhere between the trees. Tyler whispered, bear. Ryan slowly shook his head. If it was a bear, and the birds would have gone crazy. Chris swallowed. There aren't any birds. That sentence stayed with me because he was right. Whatever was making those footsteps, every living thing around the lake had already gone silent, not because it was nighttime. Not because of the weather, because something was there. The footsteps stopped. We waited. 1 minute, 5 minutes, nothing happened. Eventually Ryan forced a laugh. We are freaking ourselves out. Nobody believed him. Still, we went back inside. No one wanted to admit it, but we all stayed in the living room that night. Nobody slept alone. Around midnight, the wind returned. The trees finally began moving again. Then, a single owl called from somewhere across the lake. Everyone relaxed. Chris smiled. See, it's over. Then, the owl stopped mid-call. Silence. Again, exactly like someone had flipped a switch. Ryan slowly looked at the digital clock. 3:17 a.m. At that exact second, every sound in the forest exploded back to life. Birds screamed, frogs croaked, branches cracked. Water splashed violently against the dock. It became so loud we covered our ears. The noise lasted barely 3 seconds, then everything stopped. The silence returned. Only now we heard breathing outside, slow, deep, right beneath the living room window. Nobody moved. The breathing continued. Then, something scraped across the wooden wall, not claws, fingernails, dragging slowly along the cabin from one end to the other. Chris reached for the curtain. Ryan grabbed his wrist. Don't. The scraping stopped beneath the front door. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Nobody answered. Another 3 knocks. Harder. Then a voice, very quiet. Is anyone inside? We all looked at each other. It sounded human. An older man. Ryan stepped closer. Who is it? No reply. Instead, 3 more knocks. Exactly the same rhythm. Tyler whispered, "Don't open it." Ryan nodded. Nobody touched the handle. After nearly a minute, the footsteps slowly walked away, not toward the road, toward the lake. The following morning, we found footprints for the first time, large, bare human footprints leading from the forest. around the cabin, to the dock. Then they simply ended. There were no prints returning to the woods, no boat marks, nothing. It was as if whoever made them had walked straight into the water. Chris stared at the lake. I think we should leave. Nobody argued. We packed everything into the SUV within 20 minutes. Ryan started the engine. Nothing. He tried again. The engine turned over, wouldn't start again. Nothing. Tyler checked under the hood. Everything looked normal. The battery wasn't dead. There was no obvious problem. Then Noah quietly pointed toward the lake. The silence had returned. Every bird that had been flying seconds earlier was gone. The insects stopped. The wind disappeared. The forest became perfectly still. Again, only this time, it wasn't around the entire lake, it was only around us. Like an invisible circle surrounding the cabin, beyond that invisible line, we could actually hear birds singing farther up the mountain. Life continued normally. Only Blackwater Lake had gone silent. Ryan whispered, "It's here." Nobody asked what it was. We all understood then. From deep inside the forest came another footstep, closer than before. Another. Branches bent, bushes moved. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to hide anymore. Ryan finally got the SUV started. We didn't wait. The tires threw gravel everywhere as we sped down the dirt road. None of us looked back. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest gas station nearly 40 miles away. The difference was immediate. Birds, traffic, wind, normal sounds. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Finally, Chris said, "Do you realize something?" "What?" "I never heard what was making those footsteps." Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" "I heard it walking. I heard branches breaking, but I never actually heard footsteps." He was right. The sounds had always been wrong, almost recorded, like individual noises played one at a time. We all dismissed the thought because none of us wanted to think about it anymore. A week later, I became curious. I searched county records, old newspapers, historical maps, anything mentioning Blackwater Lake. Eventually, I found an interview with a retired forest ranger. It was nearly 30 years old. One question caught my attention. "Have you ever experienced anything unusual around Blackwater Lake?" His answer was only one sentence: "If the forest goes silent, leave before it hears you." No explanation, no follow-up, just that. I contacted the local wildlife department. The biologist I spoke with laughed when I asked about the silence. Then he suddenly stopped laughing. He asked me one question: "Did it happen after sunset?" I said yes. There was a long pause. Then he quietly replied, "You aren't the first person to ask," before I could ask anything else. He ended the call. Months passed. Life returned to normal, or at least I thought it had, until one winter morning, I woke unusually early. The room felt wrong. I couldn't hear traffic outside. No birds, no heater, no refrigerator, nothing. Complete silence. My heart immediately started racing. I grabbed my phone. The screen read 3:17 a.m. Then, outside my bedroom window, a single bird began singing. Another answered. Within seconds, the entire neighborhood filled with sound, cars, dogs, wind, everything. Only then did I realize, for a few seconds, my neighborhood had sounded exactly like Blackwater Lake. Last spring, I drove back, not to the cabin, just to the entrance road. The cabin had been demolished. Only the concrete foundation remained. A new warning sign blocked the road. It read, "Area closed, wildlife research in progress," beyond the gate. I noticed something strange. Birds filled the trees. I could hear frogs near the marsh. The forest sounded alive, except around the old cabin foundation. There was a perfect circle of silence. Nothing entered it, nothing crossed it. As I turned to leave, I heard one slow footstep behind me, then another. I didn't look back, because I finally understood what the old cabin owner had meant. The silence wasn't the danger. It was the warning. When the forest stops making noise, it's because every living thing already knows. Something is walking nearby, something that doesn't hunt by sight or smell. It hunts by listening. If you are brave enough to hear more nightmares, subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare. And if you've ever experienced something you still can't explain, leave it in the comments or send your story by email. Maybe your nightmare will become the next story told here.